Star Trek Voyager has many positive qualities, and I think it occupies a really interesting space in the fandom. While the failures of the series are widely acknowledged, my experience is that whenever I meet another Star Trek fan and start talking to them about the different series, they will quite often say something along the lines of, "Yes, Voyager is flawed, but I really like it." There's a lot of Voyager fans out there. I count myself among them, and when I feel the need for a bit of Star Trek, I probably choose a Voyager episode more often than The Next Generation. I think the series overall captures something of the lightness and the fun from the original crew, something that The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine both lack. Let's talk about those flaws in terms of the overall concept of the series. The Next Generation was mostly an Alien of the Week format, so any kind of ongoing themes in terms of plot or character kind of emerged slowly over the course of the 7 seasons. Deep Space Nine took a different focus, being based around one physical location. When DS9 premiered, this led to comparisons with Babylon 5, another sci-fi show based on a space station, which came out around the same time. And there was some controversy, who had what idea first, which show got the green light first, and so on. Voyager was also a show based around an ongoing concept, at least in theory. The crew were abandoned 70,000 years from the Alpha Quadrant and had to spend the series getting home, learning to get along with each other and dealing with whatever issues emerged on the way. Like Deep Space Nine, this immediately invited comparison with another sci-fi show. In the 90s, Battlestar Galactica meant a campy, relatively short-lived 1970s TV show, part of the explosion in sci-fi most exemplified by Star Wars. Furthermore, Voyager premiered about 6 months after The Next Generation went off the air, and was viewed by some people as the replacement for that show. And it ended up kind of a mix, a hybrid of the concept of Deep Space Nine and the Alien of the Week of TNG. While there are some serialized elements at different points in the run, the characters undergo personal growth, we meet some ongoing enemies, it's also kind of Alien of the Week in many ways. And it's very noticeable that whatever happens, whatever damage or destruction might occur, the ship looks suspiciously clean and new at the beginning of the next episode. Sometimes it gets the obvious care and attention that characterizes Deep Space Nine. Other times it's like the worst episodes of TNG seasons 1 and 2. Voyager is deeply uneven in terms of plot, in terms of character, in terms of how it applies its overall journey home concept. The drawbacks of Voyager only came to look worse when it got compared to the Battlestar Galactica remake, which came out a couple of years after Voyager ended. This remake, at least in the early seasons, was a tight, dramatic, nerve-wracking exploration of a bunch of survivors trying to find a new home, with an ongoing serialized plot where each episode built on the last. It was everything that some sections of the Star Trek fanbase had wanted Voyager to be. This comparison was further compounded by how the new Battlestar Galactica was developed, written and produced by Ron Moore, who was deeply involved as a writer, script editor and producer on lots of Star Trek like The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, 2 of the movies. After Deep Space Nine ended, he moved across to Voyager and quit the show after being involved in just 2 episodes. So in front of the camera and behind it, Voyager has this kind of enormous what-if vibe about it. What could have been, especially when you wonder what ideas in the Battlestar Galactica remake could have reshaped Voyager and how. So how about Caretaker, Voyager's pilot? Overall, I think it's mostly a success. I've seen the whole series, so obviously that influences what you think about it on rewatch. I think there are some obvious dropped story threads, but taken by itself, it sets up the concept sufficiently. Personally, I see the story of Caretaker in 3 general parts. Firstly, there's the Tom Paris section, as much of the early plot centres around him. Once the crew arrives in the Delta Quadrant, I think of the next part as the Neelix section, as Janeway relies on him as a guide. And finally, I guess the last bit, just the last few minutes or so once all the action has been dealt with, I guess that could be called something like the voyage home. Basically, what's the new dynamic on the ship? What's the new situation that the rest of the series will deal with? We start off on a McKee ship being chased through the Badlands, an area of space full of astronomical phenomena that make this a good place to hide. It's the Cardassians who are chasing, specifically Gul Evek, a character who is also in recent episodes of The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. I really like how all three series at this point were covering the McKee storyline. It gives a nice sense of coherence to the universe and its necessary context for how they deal with the McKee on Voyager, how that influences the setup of the crew. The McKee ship gets hit by some kind of displacement wave, and we cut to the credits, after which we find out Captain Kathryn Janeway has been tasked with going into the Badlands and finding it. She's in New Zealand, looking to recruit Tom Paris, a former member of both the McKee and Starfleet, who worked with Chakotay, the captain of the Marquis ship. The first third or so of the pilot basically revolves around Tom. Tom Paris is a bit of a strange character in terms of Star Trek lore. He's a pilot, and sometime before the show started, caused a crash that killed 3 other Starfleet officers. After initially covering this up, Tom's guilt led to him confessing his crime and being kicked out of Starfleet. This sounds somewhat similar to Nick Locarno from the Next Generation episode The First Duty, where Wesley Crusher is involved in an accident where another cadet ends up dead in a crash. Nick Locarno, team leader of the cadets, initially tries to cover up his own role in the accident, but his guilt leads to him confessing his crime and being kicked out of Starfleet Academy. Nick Locarno is, of course, played by Robert Duncan McNeill, who also plays Tom Paris. When Voyager was being created, the character of Nick Locarno, and I quote Wikipedia here, served as the template for the character of Tom Paris. It's pretty comical that it apparently took them a while before they would accept even auditioning Robert Duncan McNeill for what looks like basically the same role. We even see Tom Paris's father in the show, who has a picture of quote-unquote Tom on his desk, which many people argue is actually a shot from the First Duty in The Next Generation. So Locarno, Paris, whoever the hell he is, got kicked out of Starfleet and then went to join the McKee, where he got captured by Starfleet on his first mission. Janeway wants him along when she goes to the Badlands as a consultant. Paris agrees, and we next see him in a shuttlecraft, flirting with an admittedly very cute Betazoid as they arrive at Deep Space Nine, where Voyager is preparing to depart for the Badlands. On the station itself, Paris saves Ensign Harry Kim from being scammed by Quark. They head on to Voyager, and Harry Kim sees exactly how Starfleet views his new mate Tom. The ship's doctor is clearly not a fan. Neither is Lieutenant Commander Cavett, Janeway's first officer. In the Badlands, we get a similar scene to what we saw with the McKee ship. A coherent Tetrion beam scanning them. They can't escape the wave. They get pulled inside, and when they emerge, they are 70,000 years from their previous position, and multiple members of the crew are dead, including the first officer, the doctor, the head of engineering, and the cute Betazoid who was the ship's pilot. I think all these deaths have major implications for the Tom Paris character. While I get you've got to clear out some senior positions so there's room for the McKee characters, I enjoyed the sense of antagonism that was established between Paris and the Doctor and the First Officer. Paris occupied a bit of a unique position on the ship, in that elements of both Starfleet and the McKee consider him a traitor. I don't think we really see much of that from the Starfleet side after the ship enters the Badlands. Janeway, for example, never seems to care about Tom Paris's crimes. She's pretty much hung up on the fact that she served with his father. And Harry Kim is kind of his best mate straight away, and that seems to override everything else when it comes to Tom, certainly from the point of view of Starfleet. So that's a bit of a lost opportunity there, I think. Let's get back to the plot. Voyager see that they have found the McKee ship. There's no one on board. There's also a massive space station, which is sending out pulses to a planet on another system. As the crew start to deal with the damage and decide what to do next, the array starts scanning the ship and takes the crew on board. The place is set up like a farm in the American Midwest. This is obviously just a holodeck, a charade, just something to try and make the crew feel at home. They start to investigate what's going on. Tom and Harry force the aliens in charge to reveal what's underneath. They discover a corridor with the crew of the McKee ship in some kind of stasis. Everything goes black, and they wake up on Voyager 3 days later. All of the crew are there, except for Harry Kim, who is missing. The McKee ship is also missing one member of the crew, and it's agreed that Chakotay will come on board so that the two crews can discuss what to do next. Chakotay is angry to see Paris, and even angrier to discover that Tuvok is actually Janeway's security chief and had infiltrated the McKee ship on her orders. That's the end of what I think of as the Tom Paris section of Caretaker. The next part I broadly think of as the Neelix section, as he's the guy that things kind of centre around. After a return visit to the array, which proves to be fruitless, Janeway and Chakotay agree that the two crews will investigate the strange pulses that the array is emitting. As they make their way to the planet, they encounter the trader Neelix. Neelix is aware of the array, knows about the abductions it's been performing, guesses where Voyager is going, and names the species that they will meet on the planet, the Ocampa. Neelix is a bit of a weird character. Maybe the closest analogy in other Star Trek shows is Dr. Phlox. Phlox has the same kind of effervescence, the same kind of outgoing personality, the same sort of propensity for left field ideas. The difference for me is that Phlox is very consistent. He's the ship's doctor, and whatever unusual stuff he comes out with, he ultimately takes being a doctor seriously. My issue with Neelix is that the writers could never quite decide which direction they wanted to go with him. We've got the comedy side, particularly him and Tuvok. I really enjoy the relationship between these two. Ethan Phillips seems very playful in their scenes, and Tim Russ kind of dials up the grumpy Vulcan very well. It feels like the two actors have put a lot of work to make it their own thing. It's a really fun pairing to watch, so that's good. The thing is, in Caretaker, we also see Neelix agree to help the Voyager crew, then lie to them about why he wants to help them. He doesn't reveal that his partner, Kes, is being held hostage by the Kazon on the planet. Once Kes has been rescued, he wants to leave immediately, then just as quickly changes his mind when Kes says that actually she will help the Voyager crew. The writers want Neelix to be the good guy, to be the funny guy, and then they want him to be the bad guy as well. As the series went on, I guess the writers did lean more into the funny guy. Honestly, I could never quite shake the sense that behind the scenes, no one could ever really agree exactly what Neelix's character was supposed to be. So they arrive at the planet, rescue Harry and B'Elanna, and return to the array to ask the Caretaker to send them home. He can't do this. The Caretaker is dying, as Tuvok had already guessed in an earlier scene. The alien initiates a self-destruct program, as he doesn't want the Kazon, who are hungry to steal any technology they can, getting their hands on the array. The Caretaker dies, but the self-destruct sequence fails. Janeway is faced with a choice: try and use the array to get back to the Alpha Quadrant, or destroy it to protect the Ocampa. She decides the Starfleet thing to do is destroy the array, even if it strands them 70,000 light years from home. And with the alien of the week dealt with, we're into the third section of the episode, which I think of as the voyage home. Basically, how does this story, in its final few minutes, sum up the new dynamic that exists, and how does it impact the rest of the show? The McKee ship is destroyed in the fight with the Kazon, and Janeway decides both crews should be integrated on Voyager. Chakotay will be the first officer, Tom Paris will be the pilot, Chief Engineer and Chief Medical Officer are unfilled posts. There are candidates for Chief Engineer, but all they've got in sickbay is the emergency medical hologram. Neelix and Kes ask to stay on the ship. He sees himself as a cook, a guide, a diplomat. So how about the McKee? There are definite attempts to maintain a sense of conflict. For example, in the next episode with B'Elanna Torres, and there's a fantastic episode later on about a holonovel of a potential mutiny on board. Obviously, there's also Seska. There's also some conflict between Chakotay and Paris, but this gets resolved relatively early on. So actually, there's quite a few story threads. They actually did quite a lot to try and keep the idea of the McKee alive and have it make an impact on the characters. I think the problem is Voyager has more of the kind of alien of the week vibe. For example, the Paris and Chakotay stuff, on my first time watching, I missed out all the clues, all the build-up to this confrontation. So if I had to give the whole McKee on Voyager a score out of 10, maybe I would give it a 6 or a 7, I suppose. In the later seasons, I guess the biggest legacy of the McKee storyline is the relationship between Chakotay and Tuvok. Sprinkled throughout the 7 seasons, there are suggestions that these two never really reconcile their differences, that Chakotay never forgave Tuvok for infiltrating the ship. It's blink and you miss it stuff, but Robert Beltran and Tim Russ do a great job of subtly suggesting this ongoing antagonism between the two of them. How about Tom Paris? We see him go on a bit of a redemption arc, and I like that it's not an even redemption. He slips and falls at some times and improves at others. Then there's Neelix and Kes. In the long run, Neelix just about works out, both in universe and watching him on the show. The better angels of his nature pretty much win. Kes, unfortunately, didn't really work out. I remember there's an episode later on, not long before she leaves, where she gets possessed by the episode antagonist, and I thought the actress got a really good chance to show her angry side. They didn't really give the actress much of a chance to show what she could do. In Caretaker, there's some nice suggestions about the nature of the Ocampa, like maybe they're telepathic, but culturally, for whatever reason, they don't want to explore this side of themselves. The idea of a species that has almost completely squashed its potential, they're just hunkering down in survival mode, when actually they could be so much more. That's a really interesting concept. Now you've got this character in Kes. She's escaped the restrictions of her species. She has an opportunity to explore that potential, but unfortunately it was completely squandered, and it only gets really looked to in any depth in the episodes where she actually leaves. I almost forgot to mention the emergency medical hologram. Robert Picardo takes a bit of a back seat in this episode, which is fine, some people have to, but he makes a decent start as the character. There's one of the McCoy-isms that the character used so often, so basically I would say it's an acceptable start, totally consistent with what comes later for the character. And finally, there's the Kazon, the pound shop Klingons. More than anything else, they're just annoying, and one of the best things Voyager ever did was leave them behind after the Season 3 premiere. So that's Caretaker, the pilot of Star Trek Voyager. It's got its flaws, a lot of Trekkies love it, for good reasons. Thanks for watching.